Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Sriram Panchu, Senior Advocate at the Madras High Court and also a mediator. He's a president of Mediators India, has been one of the 3 mediators who worked in the Ayodhya issue, and we'll talk about that. But Mr. Panchu, welcome to The Print.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
My first question is about your piece at the Bar and Bench, the website in which you have very beautifully taken apart Justice Arun Mishra, recently retired earlier this month. And amongst the several things you talk about is not just about his run-in with Prashant Bhushan, who we know has paid a 1 rupee contempt fee, if you like, just today, which is Monday, the 14th of September, but on many other cases. But my first question to you is about your comment on Prashant Bhushan paying this 1 rupee fee, if you like, and what do you make of it?
Well, let me tell you first, Jyoti, that it gave me no joy to write this piece. I've never written anything like this, so strongly critical of a judge. I am brought up in a tradition of venerating and revering judges.
Yeah.
So to have the sad duty of having to find fault so strongly, with the judge of the Supreme Court is something more saddening to me than anything else. But if it's a duty which had to be done. Yes, I criticized, and I did something which, it's one of the conventions of the bar, that, when a judge demits office, the bar passes judgment on his performance.
Okay.
So what I'm doing is not something terribly unusual. The assessment itself may have been unusual, but I think it is the tradition of the bar that we do comment on judges' performance when they demit office. Having said that, yes, I focused on some of the major cases with Justice Mishra dealt with, which I thought were not dealt with in the manner in accordance with law. I must say I haven't appeared in any of those cases. It's not as though I claim any special knowledge. My knowledge is the same as any other law will have, but I have spelled out in the article at sufficient length why I, strongly found fault with the way he handled those cases on issues of both substantive as well as procedural fairness and propriety. Coming to Prashant Bhushan, I think a lot of us at the bar felt that he was being targeted.
Okay. In what way?
Well, his tweet of the Chief Justice has tried a motorbike. I frankly, if you ask me, I think it didn't say anything negative about the Chief Justice. So what if he wants to sit on a motorbike, test drive? What the hell? I would do it if I was Chief Justice, if I liked motorbikes and saw a nice one. So it didn't bring him down in my estimation at all for that. So I dismissed that. It'll be just in a harmless piece of, Prashant venting his ire. And as for saying that in his opinion, the last 4 Chief Justices have let the country down, it's his opinion, which a lot of people share. And you cannot go to, punishing people for their opinions.
Yeah.
And plus, in the midst of all the cases that the Supreme Court is not able to handle because of COVID, to go and pick up Prashant Bhushan's case for an opinion and to say, I'm going to, focus on this one case and see it through till the day I retire was, highly excessive, to say the least.
But is your view shared by your colleagues, or other senior advocates, perhaps even in the Supreme Court, judges in the Supreme Court?
I don't know about judges in the Supreme Court because I'm not in conversation with them on this or, other things. But yes, I think my views are shared by people who are my colleagues. But let me also qualify that by saying, I will talk mostly with people with whose views I like and share. So that doesn't come up really saying very much. But yes, I think any good lawyer, I think, would have felt troubled by the way Prashant Bhushan was being treated by Justice Mishra.
But it's more than Prashant Bhushan, isn't it? In this piece of yours in Bar and Bench, you've actually named 4 or 5 cases, and I'm just going to read them out to you. you start with Justice Loya, and this was the apparent trigger that got four senior judges of the Supreme Court at the time in January 2018 to come together in a press conference. Justice Loya is not named, of course, but apparently, and neither is Arun Mishra. And the charge in your piece is that these four judges came together apparently because Arun Mishra was being given all the choicest cases.
Yeah, well, that is a general feeling, and I think Justice Gogoi said that. At that press conference, I think he mentioned that yes, we're here because of Loya. And that is the general feeling, no doubt. As I said, what I've had to say about those cases, I've said. There's really nothing more for me to add on that score. I've in fact dwelt in those cases quite at length, I would say, in this article. So my views are there for anyone to read. There's nothing really to add to that.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that you have picked on these cases. And, another one is about the death or the assassination of Hiren Pandya, then Gujarat Home Minister. And again, you talk about how Arun Mishra restored that it was thrown out by the High Court, but then Arun Mishra restored it.
Yeah.
So what do you make of it? Why do you think that somebody like him would be doing that?
I don't want to impute motives to him. I'm very wary of imputing motives where I have nothing that I can concretely rely on. So I prefer to stick to the facts.
Okay.
And sticking to the facts, to reverse an acquittal of the High Court is not customary. It must be done only under, under rather extraordinary circumstances, which the Supreme Court has laid down. When do you reverse an acquittal of the High Court? And I look at those judgments and I say this case doesn't fit. And I look at Justice Mishra's reasoning and I said this has elemental flaws.
Like what?
Well, it's not something I want to go into now to dissect, that judgment. I'll have to, take it out. I'll have to read paragraphs. I'll have to give you per paragraph numbers. So I'd rather stay away from that.
Okay. But you do say that it did have elemental flaws.
Yes, I've said that.
All right. And in another case, again in the same piece, you talk about how during the vacation, Justice Mishra passed orders benefiting a business house named Adani.
That's right. Yes. Well, no, that's well known. In fact, Dushyant Dave wrote a very strong letter to the Chief Justice of India some time back, mentioning that case, and he mentioned 2-3 cases. And that's in public circulation, and I don't think he's had a reply to that yet.
So explain to us, to lay people like us, when you write a piece like this, or when Dushyant Dave raises a matter like this, what happens? It goes to the Supreme Court and then it just it just sort of gets lost somewhere in some file? What happens?
I think what should happen is that there should be, we should have a response.
Yeah.
He is a senior member of the bar. He is president of the Supreme Court Bar Association. You don't get more senior than that.
Right.
And when somebody like him raises a concern, it should get a response. Either a meeting where this is clarified or a written response. But it's certainly not done to not have a response at all.
So explain to me what happened with the business house with the Adanis. Do you feel that the relief given to them was unusual? I mean, you say it amounted to thousands of crores of rupees, but perhaps that this was something that was, was par for the course, wasn't it?
I haven't commented on the merits of the case. I've commented on the fact that it's very unusual to take up cases for final disposal during the vacation, especially when these are tax matters, commercial matters. But I haven't commented on the merits of the case, and that's something I'm not getting into.
But I'm asking you, Mr. Panju, what is it that bothers you about all these cases? Obviously, you've raised them because something bothers you.
Is the lack of propriety in taking up a final disposal, matter for final disposal during the vacations. A vacation sitting is only for urgent matters. It is not for final disposal. Judges do not post matters before themselves for final disposal during vacations unless it is something so urgent it cannot wait beyond the vacation. So it's extremely unusual, and that is what bothered me.
And you haven't got a response to this. I mean, this piece has only just come out, but these
Well, if Dushyant Dave hasn't got a response, I don't think I will get one.
But tell me, the course of justice is always not very straight, right? I mean, we all know that in India, it's pretty tortuous and pretty twisted. So again, the reference that you make to the demolition of 4 buildings in Cochin, again, if I were to play devil's advocate, I would say that those had violated, sort of several environmental norms, and Justice Arun Mishra did the right thing by asking for them to be demolished.
You may have a point. I mean, I can't say that you would not be, or I can't say you'd be on a wholly bad ground to say that. But what I was pointing out was, that there were factors in favor of. You see, I can understand if you, let us say, you take an environmental violation done by a big company, yes, in a mining area, and you say, I'm going to teach you a lesson.
Right.
Or you have a very clearly identified stretch of the coastline where it is damaging to build. Mm-hmm. And you say, I'm going to make this a test case, or I'm going to teach you a lesson. But that wasn't the kind of circumstances here. Here it was the High Court had found in favor of this. The location, I mean, the area had changed its nature so that when the time actually came, the buildings were not in the wrong CRZ category, So I don't think they had to be brought down. They didn't have to be demolished. This wasn't one of those cases where you teach people a lesson for what you've done is wrong. I don't think this is the case. You don't do this to 343 people. You do it to some big industry. You will think, you're setting up something in a mining area somewhere, or which you have no business doing. I'll teach you a lesson. Go after people like that.
Your piece is remarkable because there are few people who have written so strongly. I mean, I'm just quoting from a sentence that you wrote where you say, Justice Mishra swept out in grand style, dismantling several institutions in this last masterstroke. I mean, those are strong words, that you're accusing him of dismantling several institutions in the judiciary.
Well, I think when you write for a newspaper, you write an article, you must be permitted a little bit of license. Okay.
This is hardly hyperbole, Mr. Panchu.
So, dismantling several institutions is not meant to be seen as a brick and mortar dismantling of things.
Obviously not.
But yes, I in the same paragraph, I do detail the damage I think he did in those cases. Because as I said, he brought about a dissonance between the bar and the bench. And that's an institutional bonding of the highest importance.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That he brought
and I think in the way that he
Can you just repeat this, please? Because the internet is.
Yes, he brought about a dissonance between the bar and the bench, where we had, the country's most senior lawyers, going against the court for the way it was Prashant Bhushan's case being handled. And that's a dissonance. The bar and bench, must work together to bring us to the situation where we are forced to take up, a fight against the court. And our fight is not against the court, it was against the way Justice Mishra was doing things. But finally, we are seen as, criticizing the court. And that relationship between the bar and the bench is a very powerful institutional relationship.
Right.
And that's what I meant when I was saying, you're dismantling, you're harming those. Mm-hmm. And look what he did, ultimately in this judgment about contempt. To say that, because you have criticized, the judiciary, it amounts to contempt. Aren't you dismantling the freedom of free speech?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is, cold storage refrigeration. You're saying chilling effect. And I'll say cold storage refrigeration. If you say that, something like this is contempt, you cannot criticize a court. So let us not just think that it's one case. It is the implications of this kind of thing which casts a fear in people to say what they legitimately feel, honestly and bona fidely feel that they have to say. And you cannot have that in a democracy. You cannot have citizens feeling a fear, or people like you feeling a fear that, my God, if I say something about a court, am I going to be hauled up tomorrow? It's all right, Sriram Panchu says it today, he's a senior lawyer, he can find his defense, but what will happen to me? You can't have journalists.
But that's the common view, Mr. Panchu, that if you say anything about the judiciary, you're going to be hauled up for contempt.
Therefore, Jyoti, it ought not to be like that. And I think I will tell you what I feel about this. You see, I think we should examine a little more both the background and go a little bit into depth. You see, there are clear areas where something is contempt.
Mm-hmm.
The disobedience of an order of court is contempt. That is what we call civil contempt. Criminal contempt is scandalizing the court or lowering its reputation.
Right.
Obviously, something like, salacious gossip about a judge in a personal capacity is scandal.
Absolutely.
And that amounts to contempt. But to criticize a judge for having, taken a certain view, writing this judgment, or to say that, to criticize the merits of that judgment is not contempt. So I think, we should not polarize ourselves into extreme camps of one side, the bar saying, throughout this business of, contempt.
Mm-hmm.
And the judges feeling, on the defensive, because in certain situations, they may legitimately want to retain a part of punish for contempt. What about someone who prevents a judge from doing the work which he's supposed to do? That is contempt.
Right.
I don't think you can completely throw out criminal contempt. But I think what we need to do is to have this conversation between the judges and the lawyers at a very senior leadership level, to understand each other. And when judges say, we are worried about the extent to which this freedom of speech is being taken, we should not discount that. Because some of the voices I'm hearing recently are by judges who have stood up for freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. And have written some very fine judgments for freedom of speech. Justice Sanjay Kaul, for example, he did that in the case in Chennai, Perumal Murugan's case.
Yeah.
The other case in Delhi, which the famous painter's case. Oh God, how can I forget his name? Anyway, people will kill me for forgetting his name, but nevertheless, and he stood up for freedom of speech. M.F. Hussain, sorry, forgive me. The art world is going to kill me for not getting M.F. Hussain's name.
You can say this again, and then I will.
I don't mind. Yeah, doesn't matter. All right, okay. So I'll repeat that then, if you don't mind, Jyoti.
Yeah, sure.
And some of these, reservations and cautions are coming from judges who have stood up for freedom of speech in very notable cases. Mm-hmm. Take for example Justice Sanjay Kaul. I mean, his judgments in M.F. Hussain's case in Delhi High Court and Perumal Murugan's case in the Madras High Court are outstanding, judgments of freedom of speech. Now, if he says, there is something going on, I mean, I'm concerned that, the balance. I can't remember his words, but he expressed a concern that there was too much of criticism going on, or too much contrary, writing, reporting. So I think you should engage with people with the senior level of the judiciary to understand their concerns. When they say something going out of balance, why are they saying it? And similarly, they must engage with leaders of the bar and the media to understand the concerns here. What you need is a dialogue. You need a dialogue. You don't need people, talking from polarized ends at each other just through the media and through statements. You need, I think, a good dialogue between people who, I think, worry about the system and the institution and want to do the right thing.
Would you say that the constitutional right to freedom of speech and expression is an unlimited one, or does it have its limits?
Of course, it has its limits. Of course, it has its limits. I mean, limits, the Constitution itself says that there are reasonable restrictions. And so, therefore, we must demarcate those limits clearly. We must sit down, express our concerns, our worries, look at things so that we clarify, we rectify, And then we demarcate very clearly what is acceptable and what is not. And when we do that, I think the judges will find that if there is something which is a non-acceptable, print or media report, the media itself will rise up and say this should not be done. But I think we need clarity on those lines, and before clarity, we need a dialogue.
Mr. Panchu, would you say that this malaise that you're talking about, or this sense of fear, would you say that this sense of fear has been growing these last few years?
Difficult for me to say that, Jyoti. I haven't been able to kind of, tab it. It may have not. There may be times before. You may be right, although I can't kind of put a precise thing. There are certainly times in our in our independent India when the press has been under great fear.
I mean, you talk about the emergency.
Yes.
One, definitely. Yeah.
Yes, and certainly I think. But the point is that there is this fear. There is this fear today, and one must take it as it is, and say, all right, we need to grapple with it. We need to find a way out of this so that you can have free speech and you can have good speech and powerful speech. At the same time, you respect the institutions and those who man them, that they should not be subject to criticism which is negative and malafide.
So, the courts are always a place of last resort, right? I mean, you can be hauled up by any other branch, whether it's executive or the legislature, but the judiciary is the last resort.
Yes, it is.
But increasingly, it seems to be that the judiciary is also been infiltrated by the political government of the day, and that there is an overweening impact of that government upon the judiciary. Would you say?
This is again something which I know this is being said. Okay, this is not the first time one is hearing it. I know it's being said. And it is troubling that it is being said. Let me also say that. It is troubling that it is being said. Mm-hmm. I know there are cases which the court has not seen fit to take up on an urgent basis.
Like what?
And I agree with that, that the court should have got to grips with CAA. We should have dealt with the issue of Kashmir 370. These are things which the court should have taken up. The detentions in Kashmir are worrying.
But why have the court not taken it up?
I don't think, this is the answer we must get from the court. And
why do you think, Mr. Panchu? You're a...
I won't speculate, Jyoti. I won't speculate. All I'm saying is these are answers which must come from the court, and we haven't got those answers.
But have people been asking the court? Have lawyers like yourself?
A lot of people have been saying, why aren't these cases being taken up? There's no shortage of questions and remarks at the court saying, why aren't these cases being taken up? Even in the case of Prashant Bhushan, there was so much writing where people wrote and said, why are you taking up Prashant Bhushan's case? What about all these other cases? So there is no, I think, shortage of the questions, but I think the answers must come from the court.
But what does the silence from the court mean?
I would really suggest that this is something on which really you should get together a panel of perhaps senior retired judges. Yes, who can tell you at an institutional level, having seen the workings of the institution from inside, what does this mean? What are the kind of pressures on institutions? How do they time cases? When will they post? When will they not post? What are the criteria they apply? How do they decide these things?
But does this bother you, Mr. Panchu, this silence of, these very fundamental questions and issues that confront us today? Does it bother you?
Of course it bothers me, like it bothers, every one of my ilk.
Sure.
Court is not getting to grips with these questions, which are important ones, which affect a lot of people. And of course, we want the court to get to grips with these. There's no issue as far as that is concerned. Our courts exist because we bring, the law into the lives of people, and we act as a check to government, and we have the power of judicial review, And that is why India's courts are so, not just so powerful, but so crucial. And of course, we all want our courts to get about their job of doing that work. But if you ask for institutional constraints, I think you should speak to, a few who have served in the court.
Because it's unbelievable, isn't it, that on the one hand, say in Jammu and Kashmir, members of parliament who have been shut inside their homes, not allowed to get out, the government says that no, there is full freedom of movement, forget about speech and expression. But you can see them say that we are not allowed to come out.
I do remember even the case, I think Justice came up before Justice Mishra, I think it was Saifuddin So's matter,
Yes.
where the government said everything is fine with him. But that evening there was a TV report showing the man trying to get out of his house.
That's right.
He was doing that. So why did the lawyer take it back to Mishra's court next morning, Justice Mishra's court next morning and say, I'm sorry, but this is what they've told you is wrong, and call up the government for perjury? I don't know whether they tried that. They may have, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But, so there it is. I mean, I think it is the systems have to work together. I mean, the press has to focus on this. Lawyers have to take it up. The court has to respond. Liberty doesn't just function with one institution. It's a combination of the right institutions doing the right thing.
Let me ask you, Mr. Panchu, about your role as a mediator in the Ayodhya judgment. I mean, you haven't spoken about it very much. The judgment came in November last year when the land, the Sanctum Sanctorum, was given to the Hindu groups. Now the big temple is being made. Prime Minister Modi himself has gone to the Greh Pravesh, to the foundation stone laying ceremony. So what did you do in this mediation that you were part of?
Talk to the participants, the cases, the people who filed the cases.
Yeah.
We spoke to the clergy, we spoke to civil society, people from different walks of life, and overwhelmingly, I think people just wanted closure and a way in which, we could move on and live a better future. And I mean, it's a case which is a fascinating one. I don't think any mediator, very few mediators will have the kind of opportunity to do a case like Ayodhya.
Why do you think it's fascinating?
Because it has everything. It has history, it has religion, it has violence, it has political conflict, it has law, it has emotions. It has communal clashes. So to get a case to mediate, which has all these, I mean, it's unrivaled, I think.
So in this
huge lessons one has learned from that.
like,
But I'll tell you the lesson I've learned, which for me is very deeply ingrained. And I wrote about this in an article.
yeah,
The lesson I've learned is that when conflict takes place, people move to extreme ends very quickly and very easily. Because the rhetoric is raised, there's anger, there's negative emotions, and there could be negative actions. And so everything starts getting very polarized. And you lose out the ground in the middle. And people who want to be, find accommodation, consensus, either get silenced or they have to move towards the extreme ends. And that's the tragedy of most conflict, I think. The silencing of the middle. And the lesson I've learned is that if one really wants to handle public conflict, of any significant conflict, you must create that ground for the middle. The harmonizing middle, people who will push and strive for conciliation and consensus, and not get them marginalized. So in fact, some of us are working on a project, we call it the Center for Moderating Dialogue.
let's ask you the last question, the last couple of questions actually. In the mediation that you talk about and that you have so successfully done, in not just in the Ayodhya matter, I suppose law is a kind of mediation, right? I mean, being a lawyer is being a kind of a mediator. But to come back to the Justice Arun Mishra case, there are stories, lots of rumors that he will And you write about it in your Bar and Bench piece, that he could become the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, or perhaps get another plum post. Now, what would this signify to you?
Well, I don't want to speculate on what he'll get. I think whoever are the appointing authorities must, of course, take note of what is felt about him and said and written about him and do their proper job. But I want to say one thing, that, this is not just about Justice Mishra. And we shouldn't keep the focus on him, as though he is the main issue or the main problem in this. Justice Mishra, in a sense, is symptomatic of things which have gone wrong. And I think we need to focus on those things, on the larger issues and the dominant causes, and to get to grips with those, to see why is it don't we have corrective systems.
Right.
So we need to relook our systems perhaps for appointing judges. And I think a very close look to see when judges get to the Supreme Court, I think we need to pay a special attention to the judges who are going to become very senior. We don't do that now. An appointment takes place and very little is known. Nobody puts judges to scrutiny here. And the person who joins as a junior judge and nobody pays attention. But in a few years to come, that person will head the judiciary or be, amongst the most powerful collegium in the world. So we need to pay a lot of attention to that aspect. How to select the right people at that time, how to have the proper filters, because at the end of the day, it boils down to the individuals.
Right.
I would say it boils down to two things. One is, one is the individuals themselves and the processes. So we can work the processes to get the right individuals. I think that's really the thing to do.
On this note, Mr. Panchu, thank you so much for your time. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have lots of very interesting stories for you to watch.